welcome everybody. This is Allison Green from MICA. I'm the manager of partner training, support, and engagement at MICA, the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. We are super excited to offer you the second half of the trainings that we're offering the last 2 months regarding Soji, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We have our same wonderful speaker this month as we had last month, Angelica Lewis. I will let her introduce herself and get our webinar started. Thank you all for attending, and off to you, Angelica.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back for those of you who were here last time, and welcome. We'll do a quick review for folks who were not here around some of the terminology and what we are talking about when we say Soji. Are people seeing the presentation in the chat? I see someone asked for the presentation. So I think we might have to reshare, Allison. I'm not sure. When people log on, like new folks, they might not see the older one. So
will do. Thank you.
Do another one. Sure. All right. So we are going to be skipping through a few of these slides. Just bear with me going through a few. For example, we're not doing this. So Zoom functions, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar, but please feel free. I don't know if you all have access to this. Muting and unmuting, you might not since we're in the webinar view, but you can use the Q&A function in chat to ask questions. You can message, I believe, myself or Allison directly if you have specific questions. All right, so we're going to start with a few agreements for the virtual space. We ask that folks are present to the training and ready to participate. We can't do as much as we normally would in terms of breakout rooms in this format, but please do. I'll be asking questions and asking you about your own experiences with clients and the folks that you serve. So please feel free to answer those in the chat or the Q&A. I don't think you all can do the unmute function, but please, while we are in the chat, making sure that we are respecting folks and we can disagree with people's opinions, but still respecting the individual, knowing that we are all teachers and learners. So I would love to hear as much from you all as possible since you are doing this work. I worked in a shelter doing outreach and engagement years and years ago, but don't have as much experience as you all, I'm sure. So would love to hear how this information is relevant to you all. We also want to make sure that folks are feeling safe, differentiating between discomfort and safety. Sometimes these topics can go against some of our personal beliefs, cultural beliefs, things that we've learned and been socialized to believe. So it can feel uncomfortable at times learning new information. So we just want to differentiate between safety and discomfort. But at any point you feel psychologically, emotionally unsafe, please check in with Allison or myself, but we don't anticipate that happening. Just know that if you feel like some of this information is upsetting you, it could be because it is newer information and it's uncomfortable. And then lastly, being mindful of participation. I don't think we will have to worry about that. It's usually not an issue. All right, so we'll keep on going. So we'll look at a few of the statistics that we know around folks' experiences with homelessness who identify as LGBTQ. We are going to watch a short video with some young people from the Ruth Ellis Center talking about their experiences. So we'll be utilizing, research as well as lived experience to think about why this is relevant to your role. So Soji, when we are saying Soji, we are not specifically talking about the LGBTQ community. We are referring to all of us. So everybody has a Soji. Everybody has sexual orientation, who they are attracted to, who they like, love, and want to spend time with. Some folks will take the emphasis off of sexual and say attractional orientation. So that's what we're talking about here is our attraction to others. So that is our sexual orientation. Gender identity. This is something that is also something that we all have. It's not unique to folks who are non-binary or transgender. We all have a gender identity, and developmentally this forms around age 3 for all of us when we start to have a better understanding of how we identify in terms of being a boy, a girl, neither, both, somewhere on a spectrum. That is something developmentally that we know about ourselves around age 3. And then lastly, gender expression, also something that we all hold, whether we consider ourselves to be masculine, feminine, both. Maybe it fluctuates, but all of these can exist on a spectrum. So that is just a quick review. Last time we went into more detail around language and terminology for each of these categories and how people name these different identities. We will quickly go over some of those in a few, but that's what we're talking about when we say Soji. So some people are doing Soji data collection in their work. Some people are asking Soji questions on their intakes. So you all are probably at different stages with your understanding of Soji and how you are incorporating that into your work. We'll talk a little bit more about how you are incorporating this, if at all, later with a short assessment. So I will be using the terms diverse Soji because we all have Soji. So diverse Soji is often synonymous with the LGBTQ acronym. So the LGBTQ acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning. I've highlighted the T there because the other categories are typically thought of as sexual terms to describe sexual orientation or attractional orientation, whereas the T there is about gender identity. Queer and questioning can be used for different social identities, but often used to describe sexual orientation as well. All right, so we're going through these. We can't do small groups right now, but if folks want to take a second to just think about how Soji comes up in your work, if at all, how does sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression come up in your work? What language do you hear people using to name their Soji? And how is Soji relevant to your work? You can take a second to just think about that. If you want to add some things to the chat, feel free to. But this is more so just a question for you to ponder. So whether or not you are part of, the folks doing intake, or you're working directly with folks in a shelter, these things may or may not come up. It really depends on your role. But see, there's something in the chat. Oh, I don't think any of these are for me. So you might hear people using different language to talk about their sexual orientation, maybe language you haven't heard before, or maybe people are using language that is new to you. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I just want to get you thinking about how it comes up for you. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise here. Sorry about that. Okay, so we know that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks are often more likely to experience negative health and safety outcomes like homelessness, more likely to be fired or not hired based on these social identities, and also less likely to seek out health and mental health services due to stigma. So there are different laws, depending on the state that we live in, that can protect people or further discrimination towards people when it comes to housing. So in Michigan, it's a little tricky, but for anything that is HUD-funded housing, folks are protected under the Equal Access Rule, and we'll think about that later. But private landlords and people who are not funded through HUD, they technically can discriminate against folks telling them they can or cannot live somewhere, or that their partners can't live there. That is legal in several states. So it is something to think about. Michigan's a little tricky right now, but yes, the Elliott Larson Act is what typically protects folks. Sorry, just checking the chat. Okay.
I'll let you know if anything comes up.
Okay, thank you.
I have to keep looking.
Okay. So this is a chart that is thinking about youth experiencing homelessness. I know most of you are probably not working with youth specifically, but young people make up a large percentage. So we at the Ruth Ellis Center work with younger folks up to age 30. And so that is why we are speaking specifically about youth right now. So we're here because LGBTQ youth are overrepresented among this population of youth experiencing homelessness. And even within homeless systems, they face further barriers to resolving their experience with homelessness. And LGBTQ youth and adults are engaging with every agency, whether we know it or not, they are in these different systems, and they are disproportionately represented. So LGBTQ young people make up approximately 5 to 8% of the general population. Some people think that number is kind of low because young people might not be self-reporting as much, but that is the estimate, between 5 to 8% of the general population. However, they make up about 40% of youth experiencing homelessness. So that is a huge number. And as we can see, it is definitely an overrepresentation. This slide is looking at youth who self-reported reasons that they experience homelessness. So these factors are not so different from the general population of youth who experience homelessness, but it is significant to note that the top two issues reported include running away, as well as being forced out of the home, and family issues. So running away and being forced out, as well as family issues, are those top two lines that youth self-reported were the highest reasons that they experience homelessness. So it makes it less likely that at the time we're meeting young people, they have a strong familial support system to help them resolve the situation. And these young people who maybe are aging out of foster care or are coming from different systems like JJ, they become adults. And so they are adults who are also experiencing these different outcomes and that are in your care. We're going to watch that video in a second. So this research is coming from the Family Acceptance Project. Dr. Caitlin Ryan, who's been doing this research for decades with hundreds of families, has basically correlated early experiences with caregivers related to rejection of a young person's LGBT identity, correlated those experiences to health and safety outcomes later in life, like suicidality, illegal drug use, depression, bullying, risk for HIV infection, as well as STIs. So for this research, we are looking at, here on the slide, you can see young people who identify as LGBT. That's who the research was done with: lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth. Those youth who experienced high levels of rejection in the home were 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide than youth who are LGBT who experience low rejection behaviors in the home. So if folks are familiar with the ACEs study, those adverse childhood experiences, this is somewhat similar, but thinking about rejection and rejecting behaviors as those rejecting behaviors relate to someone's LGBT identity. So it's not just general rejection about, I don't like how you dress and I don't love you, but it is rejection related to a young person's LGBT identity. And so these numbers are similar for all of these different health and safety outcomes. We see that, higher levels of caregiver rejection lead to higher levels of these different outcomes we're thinking about. That number for suicidality is much higher at 8.4, but this is also pretty high for illegal drug use. Folks with higher rejection in the home were over 3% more likely to experience with drugs than folks who had low levels of rejection in the home, and folks who, for HIV, is similar in that it is over 3% higher for folks with high levels of rejection versus low. So we can think of this, these slides. I can also share this pamphlet with more information, but these young people who are experiencing this become adults that we work with these compounding, issues and outcomes. So we're working with folks experiencing homelessness who are also experiencing these different health and safety outcomes as well. And we know that that is closely related to those early experiences with caregivers.
I just wanted to point out we did receive something in the chat about the warden memo, if you would like me to read it.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so it says the warden memo was put out by the Biden administration in February of 2021, and HUD announced that it will administer and enforce the Fair Housing Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity issued the memorandum stating that HUD interprets the Fair Housing Act to bar discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and directing HUD offices and recipients of HUD funds to enforce the act accordingly. Just as a note, sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination will be considered sex discrimination.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so that is correct. Anything funded by HUD does protect those folks for sure. All right, so we're gonna watch a quick video. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and pull up the video. This was recorded a few years ago. And these were folks that received services at the Ruth Ellis Center at one point in time who had some involvement with the Department of Justice. And so they are, what they're saying can relate to basically any system of care that is working with LGBTQ folks. They're giving their recommendations and how they would like staff to treat them, work with them, language, best practices, things like that. And so they are talking specifically about involvement with the Department of Justice. However, their recommendations, I think, could be applied to folks working within any system. And so we will talk about this and debrief it a little bit when we're done. But we're just kind of giving you the explanation here. And we're also showing recording versus having one of them maybe on a panel or coming through to talk with us physically in this space, because we know that it can be traumatic to keep reliving an experience or a story. So we show our videos in kind of a trauma-informed way so that folks will not have to continuously share those experiences. So if there are questions or things that you might have for these folks, I can try my best to answer, as I know most of these folks, but that is why we're not having, people on the call physically or on a panel. And just FYI. So let me know if there are any audio visual issues.
Looks great.
For me, growing up in Detroit, Michigan was one of the ways, like all of my friends were involved in the juvenile justice system.
I got in the juvenile justice system through school and streetwise from my mother. Actually, I ran away. I wasn't run away. It just went down far from there.
Hanging with the wrong crowd. But since then, in and out, it only takes a little bit of trouble to go back.
I also came out during that time as a bisexual male. I was me, and I showed that, and I felt like me being me was the problem.
I don't recall ever meeting anyone in the juvenile justice system who had any knowledge of LGBTQ competency. I did feel like they did treat me differently because of my identity, especially being Black and trans. Just being stigmatized alone kind of makes you a target.
Sometimes it be a sense of people not being aware of what being LGBTQ is. They didn't call me by my preferred name. They didn't treat me as a human being. I don't feel like they were aware of what being a transgender woman was. The barriers of what you have to go through as a transgender woman, period.
Just for instance, them not being treated as equal. I had a security guard when I was locked up, and he said I was too feminine. Because of that, he didn't allow me to come out of my cell on his shift. Something small thinking back, but now it's like, that is big.
I had to defend on my own. I had to make sure that I was safe. I had to make sure that everything was good, and I had to survive for me. And I felt like I asked for help. I did. Trust and believe I asked for help.
As far as the probation officer, they weren't understanding at all.
I don't identify as male, so don't put me in a room full of men. One of two things can happen. I could be attacked physically or sexually,
I don't feel like we're valued, and honestly, I don't feel like it's any type of respect in regards to the trans community because they don't know anything about the trans community. To them, like, we're just boys, period. When I actually got taken down there to the holding cell and everything like that, like, they tried to tell me that I had to cut my hair out, like I had a full sew-in.
Literally, the counselors, all of them. How can I change you? How can I make you something that you're not?
As far as my needs were being met, they asked questions. As far as them caring about my answers, I'm not sure. They never mentioned anything about my rights and safety.
Well, I can recall having a probation officer who knew I was a part of the LGBT community, treated me like a young man who was trying to get his life together.
My PO, she actually was like a second or third mother to me. She was the whole reason, like, I had my first job at 16 and 17 years old when I ran away from home and everything. She really had my back.
My caseworker that I had, she was more of the person that was understanding. Even if she didn't understand, she would try her best to understand as much as she could. She called me by my preferred name. And even though they tried to paint this picture of me being a violent person, when it got to being in the courtroom and it was her time to speak, she explained to them like what total difference it was to the story that they were trying to give.
Miss P was literally like the light at the end of the tunnel. Like when she was there for those little couple hours that she worked her shift, it was like, okay, like I can bring you. She was just nice to me, and she was loving, and she was caring, and that's all I needed. That's all I needed. And she was the one that told me to keep going. She was the one that told me, don't let nobody stop you from being you. I really just respect it, and I love it.
If I was to host a training, the first thing I want them to do is to learn about gender pronouns. I think that helps people who are not really aware of, you may look like a guy, but you identify as a woman. So one of the biggest concerns for me was my hormone replacement therapy.
I feel like they should be able to administer any type of medication that they need while being in the juvenile justice system. I know it's other transgender women that are on hormones. I honestly feel like they should be able to take those hormones while they're there.
Try and understand people's situations, circumstances, what they're going through, where their mindset is. Try to counsel. You don't be so quick to react. Treat people as you would want to be treated regardless of background. It shouldn't even be that deep.
You should think about it as if it's somebody that you're related to or somebody that you're close to. How would you want them to be treated? Or even closely, like, how would you want to be treated?
I think they need to work more hands-on with the LGBT community outside of the juvenile justice system to kind of understand what has brought these people to this point in their lives, if that makes sense.
I was not a angry kid. I was very respectful. I learned how to respect my elders. I learned how to do that. If they look into my eyes and see I'm just coming to a place that I do not know, all these people that I do not know, all these things that I do not know, all these things that's happening so fast, my life literally changed overnight.
We are the most misrepresented, the most unnoticed.
As workers of the system, you should want to reform and be that adding quality to society.
Be aware of what LGBTQ persons go through outside of the system. How you personally feel should not matter, when someone is sliding goods in your hand.
They should possibly come and get some type of training at an organization. People that are not only qualified but are trained to being able to relate to these LGBTQ youth on certain levels.
Being a part of the LGBT community, we deal with so much. And when we seek those type of professionals for help, to have those people look down on you and or be unkind to you, it's just kicking somebody while they're down.
But I feel like in order for you to want somebody to transform, you would have to listen to them first.
Come in with an open mind and love one another. I hope that somebody big sees this and do something about it, because it needs to be done. That's all.
All right. So if folks have any, sorry, I'm distracted by the chat. If folks have any questions or comments about the film, feel free to add those to the chat. You can also, anything that came up for you, what did you hear people saying that they were requesting of staff, or any recommendations that they had for staff? But I'm sure you could hear the slide where we were talking about LGBTQ folks being less likely to seek different services in the mental health fields. I think it is definitely similar to folks who are looking for shelter. I've been at the Ruth Ellis Center for about 4 years and worked in our drop-in center, and witnessed young people who did not have a place to go at night kind of opt out of shelters and go into those spaces because they didn't feel like it was safe. So they might be in an abandoned building, they might couch surf in spaces where they didn't necessarily feel safe either, or sleep outside because shelters were also not a safe space for them. So you can probably hear that sometimes they are not seeking certain services because they don't trust those systems, or because they've already had negative experiences with other systems of care where folks are not seeing them for who they are, or taking their identities into account and how to be, culturally competent, have cultural humility, all of that.
So we have a couple comments in the chat. One says, great film. It was very genuine. You can tell. And another one says, the video was really impactful. Stats on LGBTQ involvement in juvenile justice system, disproportionately personal experiences that were so biased and harmful. And we have another comment that just said it was touching.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, folks. So you could probably hear different people saying, it got low at that point, but I think someone said, I would like folks to get training and learn about pronouns, calling people by the pronouns that they use, using their chosen name, things like that. So it seems very simple, but it's a really big deal for folks who are in those communities. All right, so I'm going to pull the PowerPoint back up, but feel free to keep adding to the chat as well.
So we have another one come in that said, I enjoyed the film. Juvenile justice system employees need sensitivity training. And then I believe a question came in that says, is the FHA enforceable within a prison or long-term jail incarceration? Would federally funded facilities be subjected to any laws relating to housing? And then they're letting us know they're fairly new to the housing division.
Good question. I don't know as much about the FHA stuff as it applies to those systems, but they have their own policy. So the PREA policy is something that is, I think, not similar to the equal access work, but it definitely is there to protect folks on the basis of their gender identity, their assigned sex at birth even. So PREA stands for the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which is not the best acronym, but it is in place to help protect folks. Good questions. Oops. All right, so we will keep going. And if you were here for the last training, we went into different social identities. We talked a lot about our own social identity. We didn't talk a lot, but people got to think about their own social identities, how they name these for themselves. I'm just highlighting this really quickly to show you all that there are 11 different social identities here. They develop throughout our lives. We don't have a whole lot of choice involved in most of these. They are who we are. They impact how we know ourselves and how other people know us as well, how people treat us, see us. And we are part of larger social groups with folks who share those same identities with us in terms of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, etc. So we are focusing on Soji, so their sexual orientations. Assigned sex at birth is actually included in this, and gender identity. And those identities are a part of our social identities, and they all intersect to make us whole people. They make us who we are. And so for a lot of the young people that we serve at the Ruth Ellis Center, and I'm sure the folks that you all are serving, they have these intersecting identities. And these identities compound to make their experiences maybe a bit more complicated when we're thinking about socioeconomic class and race and sexual orientation and gender identity, and how all of those things can come together to make someone's experience navigating resources and navigating safety in different systems of care that might make things more or less complicated. Keep on going. So we're not going through these slides for long, but just giving folks a brief overview. Assigned sex, this is typically on our birth certificate. These are a few terms you might find on a birth certificate. And intersex identity is often a note on a birth certificate. And so that could just be a variation in someone's chromosomes, hormone levels, or secondary or primary sex anatomy. So we just differentiate between assigned sex at birth, which is biological, and gender identity, which is intrinsic to who we know ourselves to be. We can name this around age 3. So assigned sex and gender, we use terms interchangeably to talk about these two things, but they are different categories. And I think traditionally in most systems, not just the ones you all are working in, any systems that have bed assignments and are unique to serving one gender or another on a binary usually are going off of assigned sex only and not gender identity. So when we're thinking about placing families or, shelters that are only for women, shelters that are only for men, we are thinking about assigned sex, and we're thinking about shelters that are for folks who are assigned male or shelters for folks who are assigned female. Intersex, we don't even really think much about that identity, but there are folks who might not fit in either of those categories that are intersex. So we typically go off assigned sex when we're thinking about bed assignments. And what a lot of folks are thinking more about now is how assigned sex and gender are different. And so like we saw in the video, there were trans women saying, I don't fit in with this room full of boys. I don't identify as a boy. I understand that my assigned sex might say male on a birth certificate, but I actually identify as a woman. And it is not safe for me to be in these spaces with an all-male facility. And so there are different variances and things that can happen to protect folks in different systems of care. But this is what we are thinking about today, how gender identity and assigned sex, although similar, in terms used interchangeably, are actually different. So we're not going through all of the language here for the purposes of time. Feel free to watch that recorded video for more on gender identity. Gender expression, again, this is our outward appearance, how people often, the first thing that they see about us and notice about us, are we masculine, feminine, how's our hair, our clothing, our body, mannerisms, things like that. Some examples of diverse gender expression here. Skipping through all of this. Okay, so pronouns. We're going to go through this really quickly. Some folks might be using pronouns regularly in their work. Some might not be familiar at all. There's a range of where we probably fall here. But you might have seen pronouns more on people's IDs, name badges, email signatures. And quite frankly, it is, not quite frankly, but the dictionary definition is, it's a word that is used instead of a noun or noun phrase. Pronouns refer to either a noun that has already been mentioned or to a noun that does not need to be named specifically. So if we think about using someone's name, we're not going to keep referring to someone with their name. We'll usually say she or he instead. And so that's what we're talking about here. Are we referring to someone with the pronouns that we're probably more familiar with, she or he, or other pronouns that maybe we're not as familiar with, like ze, there, here, things like that. So they is probably maybe more familiar to some folks. A lot of people who identify as non-binary, gender non-binary, might use they, them, theirs pronouns. And that is in most dictionaries now as a singular pronoun. So you can refer to one person, referring to them as they. They are my favorite person. I love them, and that's their coffee. Those are some examples of how that might sound. That is in most dictionaries now. So language is always evolving, and the way that we use it is always shifting, usually to try and be as respectful as possible of different communities. So if we think outside of gender identity, if we're thinking about race and ethnicity, Even the term intersex, the previous term was hermaphrodite, and that term is not as respectful anymore. So language is always evolving, and it might seem difficult to catch on or to kind of know what's happening, but it is recommended that we try and stay up to date with what is recommended in terms of best practices with language. And so this is just an example of that, where we are expanding more and thinking about pronouns, not just on a binary scale, but also non-binary. So pronouns, why are we sharing them? Why are we doing this? For many of us, this might seem ridiculous to introduce yourself and say, hey, my name is, blank, and my pronouns are. But for people who are working with others, we know that that is a way for folks to know that we are maybe a safe person to talk to, a person who understands some of this stuff, and someone who maybe they can disclose their pronouns to as well. So I know at the Ruth Ellis Center, we typically, and I apologize for the silence in the background, hopefully it's not too loud. We typically introduce ourselves right away with name and pronouns, and we ask folks if they would like to share their pronouns as well. We don't do this with folks who look like they're non-binary or transgender. We ask everybody the same question, so it is the same across the board. And you can't know someone's pronouns just by looking at them, and these are some of the reasons why. And misgendering a person, referring to them with the wrong pronoun, might not seem like a big deal, but it can have really long-term and short-term impacts that are damaging and that are really negative for someone to experience. They can create feelings of alienation. It can make folks feel dysphoric, like they are not themselves. It can make them feel disrespected. It can also cause further discrimination as well as violence and harm, depending on the setting or how it's done. So that is why we are thinking more about pronouns and doing it to be an ally to this community if we are not in this community. Okay, so that is all about pronouns. Are there any questions about pronouns before we keep going? Usually these larger cultural shifts have to happen, within agencies, and if this is something that is done uniformly, that is something that is done within the agency. But if it's something that you're comfortable doing and you already are asking folks about names and pronouns, great. If it's something you're like, I don't understand this, and I feel like I would do more damage by doing that, that is also okay. But I think the best practice and recommendation that we have is if you are comfortable doing so, asking folks, say, like, I have your name is this, this is what I have listed. Is there another name that you go by or that you would like me to use when we're one-on-one? Maybe I can't enter all of this into HMIS, but I believe HMIS does have an alias or a section where you can do that. Maybe I can't put this into your file or your legal documents, but when we're one-on-one, what name would you like me to use? And are there any pronouns that you would like me to use? Some folks don't know what that means. If I'm not using your name, should I refer to you with this pronoun or this pronoun? That's just an informal way to do that. All right, if there are no questions, I'll keep on going. So sexual or attractional orientation, again, this is just who we are attracted to. These are a few words that describe a few words people might use to describe how they identify in terms of their attraction to others. We're not going through all of this now. And we're going to get right into the HUD info. So I'm thinking about the HUD equal access rule. Unfortunately, none of our staff who work in our housing department were available today. They usually do this part, so bear with me. But I think I've got the most updated notes. So in June of 2020, HUD proposed a new rule that would make it easier for emergency shelters to discriminate against LGBTQ plus folks, specifically transgender and gender non-conforming people, by allowing shelters to require proof of assigned sex at birth to correspond with the gender the shelter serves. So this was something that was switched when we saw administrative shifts. So as new administratives come and go, there are different clauses and things that are that can be input to impact folks and their safety. So the equal access rule has been around, I believe, since 2016. Yeah. So the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, this equal access rule took effect in October 2016, and it has included directives on placing individuals in accordance with their gender identity versus their assigned sex. But as you see in 2020, that kind of changed with changes in administration. We are now back in a safer place for folks in 2021. Let's see here. Just going to read a quick note here. So among homeless LGBTQ folks, the average age of being homeless or experiencing homelessness for this group is maybe their first time was around 15 years of age. So that's just something to keep in mind. Folks who identify as LGBTQ who are experiencing homelessness often experienced it for the first time around age 15. So we saw that slide earlier, thinking about family rejection and being kicked out of the home or running away due to not having a safe environment at home. That kind of adds up. Nearly 2/3 of homeless shelters in a recent study failed to enroll a person properly once they identified themselves as transgender. So, and this is not to blame folks. I know we often don't have the training and support to know how to work with some of these things to be as culturally competent as possible. But that was where we stood in a recent study. Folks were not really sure of how to properly house someone, and, they weren't identified properly. Nearly a quarter of homeless transgender residents report being assaulted by other residents or staff at homeless shelters. So I'll say that one more time. Nearly a quarter of homeless residents who identify as transgender report being assaulted by other residents or staff at homeless shelters. All right, so discrimination can look a lot of different ways. I'll just give a few examples here. Maybe someone who is a staff is referencing a person's surgery, whether or not they have had surgery, and making that a requirement to access appropriate housing. Maybe someone refuses to enroll a participant because it would make other people feel uncomfortable or unsafe. These are ways that discrimination can show up. And it might be under the guise of protection. Like, I just want to make sure everybody feels safe and protected, so we're going to refer you to a different shelter. But that is, in fact, discrimination under the Equal Access Housing Policy. Okay. Let me know if there are any questions while I'm moving through these slides as well.
Not yet.
Okay, cool. So this applies to all HUD supported housing, which many of the people we serve currently access or could access. So all of these different programs, anything provided, being supported by HUD. This is community development block grants, the continuum of care, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS or HOPWA. All of these are protected here. And at this time, no individual is required to prove their gender based on their assigned sex at birth. So, whatever their ID is saying, et cetera, that is not required at this time. So this applies to family shelters as well. People who are transgender can sleep in beds consistent with their gender identity. And, there are options for folks who are non-binary as well, not just folks who are identifying as a woman or a man. Lesbian, gay, bisexual people cannot be discriminated against in HUD-funded housing. We've already said that. And also queer families are recognized. So LGBTQ families, and that can look a lot of different ways. So same-sex couples, people who are single moms, single dads, same-sex couples, as well as multi-generational families and non-romantic groups who present for services as a family, which, if you're familiar with chosen family in the LGBTQ community, there are a lot of folks who might identify as family. You might have someone who is a gay mom, a gay dad, an aunt, an uncle, as well as someone who is considered more of the child in the family who are not biologically related, but they identify as family. So all of this is covered in this rule as well. So non-romantic groups who present for services as family are also allowed to stay in family settings. So we're going to do a quick scenario Q&A. Feel free to add your responses in the chat. The only question that we have, the question reads, so you run a 50-bed emergency shelter for women, and the project is housed in an old firehouse and only has congregate sleeping and bathroom facilities with no privacy for any clients. One of the women staying in the shelter comes to a staff person and identifies themselves as transgender. So someone who is assigned male at birth but identifies as a woman, that is their identity. Do you allow them to continue using the same facilities as other clients? What would you do in this scenario, knowing what we know now about the equal access information? I see Thurston saying, yep, thank you. No wrong answers here. Whatever you think the answer is, go ahead and put it in. Okay. So I'm seeing lots of yeses show up, and yes, but okay, let's see. There's a little bit more in that one. Would also, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. Yes, no separations at the shelter. Oh, okay. So the answer is not only can you allow it, but are required to do so. You can't isolate clients based on the fact that they're transgender or their identity. Isolation, as we know, in this setting and other settings is not recommended for folks and can cause further harm and damage, making people feel like there's something wrong with them. And oftentimes we think we are doing, folks a service by saying, okay, you can definitely stay here, but we're going to put you in this secluded area. If someone requests that, okay, that's different. But by isolating folks, we are saying that there's something wrong with them and their identity and maybe trying to prioritize the comfort of others. And that is not the recommendation here. And then the third point here is a client may request an accommodation, in this case, perhaps requesting a bed assignment near the staff workstation or access to a space set aside for highly vulnerable clients. However, staff may not impose or require a client to accept an accommodation. Okay, so I don't know if folks have areas like this, but this is something that HUD has said is something that can be done. This is language coming from HUD as well. So if there are spaces for highly vulnerable folks, that is something that can happen. I know historically we've often learned about the LGBTQ community as a community that is not necessarily more vulnerable to discrimination and harm. They are often thought of as predatory, or there's a lot of stigma involved, and people might assume that they are going to cause more harm, or, that there is some sexual deviance involved. And so we want to highlight that is the opposite is true, in fact, and that these folks are often at risk, more risk for harm and discrimination than other communities. And so just keeping that in mind. And then 4, treat all clients that are eligible, in this case, anyone identifying as female, with the same services, staff, questions, and setting that all other clients receive. So that is coming from the equal access recommendations. What is the protocol for rooms that are 2 beds only? Good point. I think this is the same. And I'm actually, when we are done with these slides, I'm going to pull up, if I can find it, I'm going to pull up some scenarios that HUD has put out. I don't know if they're still available on their website, but there's a list of scenarios, and I'll share that in the chat and also go over a few. And I think that question should be answered in one of the scenarios. But great question. Put that in the parking lot. So there's an assessment that organizations can review together, and this allows for reflection of our own agencies, where we have made progress and where we still have room for growth and improvement. We're going to go through the assessment questions, and I don't think we're going to take time in small groups to go through this, but we will go through each of these assessment questions, and you can kind of jot down where you all think you are in your own organization. And I can also share in the chat this document so you can see these and have those with you. Give me 1 second. Okay, so the slides we're going over, that's just a PDF copy of them. And these are kind of where people can go and look and determine if their organization is meeting some of these needs or if they still need to do more work here. Usually there's more work to be done, and that is okay. It's just kind of knowing where you stand. So this is the general overview here. There's a lot of words. I apologize. It is word heavy, text heavy. So ensure staff, volunteers, and contracts are aware of all policies regarding equal gender access and comply. Client cannot be ineligible because their appearance or behavior does not conform to gender stereotypes. Do not ask questions or seek information concerning a person's anatomy or medical history beyond elements necessary for the purpose of providing services. So, for example, if this was a conversation around someone needing to take, their hormones in some fashion or form, and they were, asking you questions, and it was a medical conversation around their medicine or something, maybe that might come up. But the recommendation is to just kind of shy away from any questions about surgeries, anatomy, and transitioning, unless that is something the person is engaging you with and they want to have that conversation. Next, use appropriate, inclusive language in communications, publications, trainings, personnel handbooks, and other policy documents. So this usually takes some time to integrate all of this culturally into your organization, changing language and documents, as well as like volunteer training, all of that takes time. So this is a shift that the whole agency has to make, not just, one person. Make equal access rule policies and procedures publicly available. Include gender identity and gender expression in a list of attributes protected from discrimination in policies and procedures. Let me know if there are any questions about this slide. All right, so when we're thinking about harassment, usually the intent of the harassment is not usually, but sometimes the intention is not negative, but the impact can be. So we are thinking about harassment in terms of the impact of the behavior that was harmful versus the intention of the behavior that was harmful. So this, let's see. Okay, include transgender and non-gender conforming to a list of groups vulnerable to harassment and any anti-discrimination or policies that you may have. Harassment includes behaviors that are experienced as offensive, aggressive, or intimidating. So for LGBTQ clients, this can include consistently or maliciously not using the client's affirmed gender pronouns or name or chosen name, asking any questions about a client's body or appearance, disclosing that a client is transgender or gender nonconforming to others, or any sort of physical intimidation. Ensure clients understand their rights regarding harassment and discrimination, expectations for non-harassment and non-discrimination behaviors, and respect for others in maintaining confidentiality. Require project staff, contractors, volunteers, and clients to use clients' name and pronouns appropriately. So this is also language coming from HUD, but we don't use the language preferred gender pronouns anymore, or preferred name at the Ruth Ellis Center specifically, because preference kind of highlights that it is a choice or an option. We just say the name that someone uses or the pronouns that someone uses. All right, so managing and resolving violations. Clients know the formal grievance policy, so making sure that folks have that information. Taking immediate action to resolve inappropriate behavior or harassment, even if you don't know what to do, speaking with a supervisor and coming up with a plan there. Mediate conflicts between clients. If a client needs to be moved for harassment or safety concerns, move the client with a bias versus the client who is experiencing the harassment. Ensure clients without an Identification, understand resources available to obtain ID. So partnering with organizations with expertise around the process of changing gender markers or name changes, et cetera, if that is something that the person is interested in. And then having policy to correct any misinformation that transgender clients threaten the health or safety of other clients solely based on their non-conforming gender expression. I'm just going to go back really quickly and say, and we'll look at some of this in the scenarios I'm going to pull up, but a person can be triggered by another client and have valid feelings of anxiety, fear, etc. That is no way related to the actual behavior of the other client. So someone might say, I'm really uncomfortable, with a trans person being in the same setting as me, and that is valid, and that is okay. They can have those feelings. But in those situations, we do not exclude the person who might be trans or LGBTQ because of another person's reaction or discomfort. That is, a time to have a conversation. And maybe if that person would like to be moved themselves to a separate area, but we're not going to, again, isolate folks who are LGBTQ because it makes others uncomfortable. So for example, my presence might trigger someone in a way. Maybe they've had experiences with Black women before and, they don't feel comfortable around me, but I would not be the person who is asked to change or move because someone is triggered by my presence or what maybe I might remind them of. So confidentiality, unless the client gives permission to share their identity as an LGBTQ person or as someone who is transgender specifically, we are not sharing that. And there is a minimum need to know policy. It can be really harmful when information is shared incorrectly. And there should be informed consent involved where people know where this information is going. So if you are collecting Soji data, we have a whole training on that if folks are interested in that training. But we definitely have recommendations around confidentiality and informed consent, letting people know where that information is stored, who can see it, how it is shared. Let's see. Next, we have data collection. It's important to collect information, this information to ensure that individuals don't receive discriminatory treatment and that access to services are equitable. All data collection allows the community to better understand the needs of individuals experiencing homelessness and then what programming or services might be needed to best meet those needs. So perform intake and data collection in a private space, if possible. Gender identity is not required to match the gender listed on the ID or documents or the assigned sex that is on the ID. A client may not present as the way they identify. So maybe someone's appearance does not match what you expect a woman or a man to look like, but we are going with how that person identifies. Intake materials should allow for clients to indicate their legal name, the name they prefer to go by, and their gender identity. All right, safety. So we are ensuring that clients with prescribed hormones or other medications as part of their gender-affirming healthcare regime have access to those medications. So in line with existing shelter medication policies, we want to treat this situation as you would with a client who needs medication for any other health issues like diabetes or cancer treatments, whatever medicine the policy is around medication. We are using that same policy for folks who are using hormone therapy. Clients have a right to request accommodations based on their personal safety and privacy concerns. You might not have the ability to meet all those needs, but you can at least listen and explain what you are and are not able to do to accommodate folks. Accommodations are based on clients' wishes, not staff's, and then staff may recommend accommodations if they have concerns about client safety. So if you do have a concern and you can't impose this upon someone, but you can say, hey, I actually, do you mind if I share a couple of recommendations with you as it relates to your safety? And that is fine. Okay, so that is those are all of the rules right there. for the assessment questions. We're not going to go into breakout rooms or anything, but these are some of the questions you all can reflect on or share with your agency at a later date. What assessment items are you currently implementing in policy and practice? What items do you still need assistance implementing? What support do you think you need to accomplish this? And who would you work with to ensure compliance? Is it a supervisor, the city of Detroit, HUD, etc.? So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and see if I can pull up the equal access scenarios for us. But are there any questions while I'm doing that?
I'm not seeing any now, but if any come in, I will read them for you while you're looking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, apologies, folks. I just had it, and now I don't see it. So I'm gonna, while I'm searching for that, I'm going to show you a little bit more about our agency at the Ruth Ellis Center, some of the services that we offer. And if I do not find this in time, I will definitely have Allison email it out to you all. Here. 1 second. So yeah, we're going to watch a short video about the Ruth Ellis Center, and then go through some of our services and hopefully find this document soon.
We provide a safe space. And I feel like as long as it's safe, as long as everybody is interacting, being able to dance and come and be themselves, I feel like it means a lot.
The first time here, I cried because it was like, I thought I was the only person in the world, right? And it was a pretty amazing experience because everybody was so welcoming, right?
Sorry, folks, there's a bit of a lag, so I'm gonna pull this up one more time, and hopefully that will not happen.
We provide a safe space. And I feel like as long as it's safe, as long as everybody is interacting, being able to dance and come and be themselves, I feel like it means a lot.
The first time here, I cried because it was like, I thought I was the only person in the world, right? And it was a pretty amazing experience because everybody was so welcoming, right? Like nobody made me feel weird or like something was wrong with me.
If you're a part of the LGBTQ community and you don't know where to go, like this is the best place to come for you to find who you want to be.
Ruth Ellis Center saved my life, to be honest. Before Ruth Ellis Center, I didn't really have many friends. I didn't like anyone. And then when I came to Ruth Ellis Center, everybody was all nice and sweet. And everybody wanted to know who I was. And it was just like, okay, I guess I can be comfortable here. And that's how I became comfortable at Ruth Ellis.
You're gonna see laughter, you're gonna see voguing, you're gonna see people expressing who they wanna be, you're gonna see like everything. You're going to see just fun.
Ruth Ellis herself liked to dance, and that's our favorite thing to do here. It's like all else matters, and then dance is life. Voguing is also a form of language, so it's like even when you see them out here dancing, the music is loud. You think that they're not talking, they're talking, like they're communicating, they're having the best conversation that you would never know about. That's what I think ballroom is, like a way for LGBTQ people to like talk.
I was ecstatic. I'm like, a health and wellness center right under where I work and where I'm at all the time. Like, who wouldn't like that? We don't have a lot of affirming health centers in this area of Detroit. So it's like, to have that, it was just extremely helpful.
And you see these people mostly like every day, so they really like my family for real. We get along, and they're very cool, very helpful.
The Roof Ellis Center, it makes me feel great. It makes me feel safe, loved. It makes me feel happy.
If you want to be that free spirit that is gender queer, or if you want to be that girl that you never were able to be at home, or if you want to be that boy that you were never able to be, like, this is the place for you to find who you want to be and what makes you comfortable.
Roof Ellis to me is home. Yeah, home.
All right, so that is a little bit more about our organization if folks are not as familiar. And I did find the scenario, so we've got that, but I'm going to go through a few of our services first, and then go through those scenarios as well. So we have a family preservation program. If you all know of any young people ages 5 to 21 who are in need of support services within their family units, we provide psychoeducation, so education as well as therapy services for families as a whole, not just the young person, to better support stability, housing stability, placement stability, and permanency for LGBTQ youth. And getting caregivers more comfortable with safer behaviors for better health and safety outcomes for the young person. We also have an integrated health and wellness system. We work really closely with Henry Ford, and all of their staff who work with us are trained in LGBTQ affirming health services. We've got a shower, clothing closet, safe sex kits, hygiene kits, all of that in the Integrated Health and Wellness Center. And we do everything from flu shots to HIV prevention and care. We also provide free hormone placement therapy. So if folks are looking for healthcare that is LGBTQ affirming, this is a great space for them to come. And so I said that we have a shower because that was a recommendation from the young people that we serve when the space was being built, knowing that a lot of the folks that we serve are staying in places that don't have running water, or they might need a shower before coming in. So that is there as well, because we know that was a barrier for some folks going to the doctor, feeling like they didn't feel comfortable getting undressed and doing all of that without showering first. So we've got all of the things that they would need to clean up, as well as wash clothes there, or get new clean clothes as well. Got a drop-in center that has some of those same things: showers, clothing closet, hygiene kits, safe sex kits, laundry facilities, as well as just a social space for folks to come and be themselves. And we've got, as you saw in the video, there's lots of dancing and voguing that happens there. Usually hot meals on Mondays and Wednesdays, access to computers, case management, all of that stuff. And this is for ages 13 through 30. We've got a couple of different employment programs through a summer internship, as well as, summer internship, as well as a 2-year paid internship, and different peer facilitated support groups. So right now I know we have a group for trans women, specifically transgender women, men who identify as gay or bi-attractional, as well as we had a group for transgender men. I'm not sure if it's still operating, but there are different peer-led groups. Kofi House is a non-residential space for folks who identify as women, queer women, and girls. And a lot of the same services that are happening in our drop-in center are happening here, but it's a little bit more quiet and intimate. Families are allowed to bring children here if they need to, whereas the drop-in center, we can't have younger people. So people under 13 are not allowed. So this space, if folks have children, they're able to come here as well and receive a lot of the same services from our drop-in center. And this is about 7 minutes away from our main location in Highland Park. So the slide that is probably most relevant to you all is about our permanent supportive housing that is currently being built. This is unique for LGBTQ youth. These services are created with LGBTQ youth in mind, ages 18 to 25-ish. People are allowed to stay as long as they need to, so it is not limited by time. We're hoping that all of the support services that will be on site will help folks if they wanted to move on, get their own housing, that they have the supports to do that. But folks can stay as long as they would like to or need to. There's going to be 43 units at Claremont and Woodward, and we are anticipated to open sometime next year. We got set back due to COVID, so sometime next year, these spaces should be open, and referrals are coming through the CAN. So this is not, we cannot discriminate and say folks who are not LGBTQ can't be here. Anyone can stay here, but the services are unique to the needs of LGBTQ youth in that age range. All right. So I think, yep, that is all for our slides. I'm going to pull up the equal access scenarios now that I found them. These are two books that have chapters from folks who work with us. Dr. Kofi, who some of you might know, also known as Dr. Amory Robinson, has a chapter in the book on the left on Black LGBTQ gender nonconforming youth in juvenile detention. That's where she's done most of her work in that field, direct care work with folks. And then Jesse, who is my supervisor, has a case study from our family preservation program in the document on the left that can be found online, if anyone's interested in those. And this is our general contact information. If you have specific questions about training, that would be this last email address here. General information about the center, you can go to info, and this is our address and phone number. If folks have questions about housing, our housing manager is Luke, and that is Luke's email address. And then my email address.
So some folks in the chat were responding to your services, saying that this is awesome, this is amazing. And then we have one question of, when was the Ruth Ellis Center founded?
Good question. I have another video for that. We opened in 2000. So, and yes, we opened in 2000. We've been around since then.
So we do only have about 15 minutes left. If folks have other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will make sure that we ask them while Angelica's doing the next activity.
Okay, so this is, I'm going to put this in the chat when we're done. I don't know if folks have seen this before, but these are different scenarios that the equal access folks have put out. I think it's really helpful just to kind of know how you might respond in some of these situations. So I'm going to read through scenario one. I think it kind of relates to the question that was asked about, what do we do if there's a room with only 2 beds and one person identifies as transgender and maybe another person does not feel comfortable staying in that room? So the setting is a small rural shelter that houses 20 men and 8 women in separate bedrooms of 4 to a room. The staff person, Jennifer, walks onto the porch of the shelter used by clients to smoke. 2 clients, Kelly and Dan, are on the porch having a conversation as Jennifer enters. And I'll just say on the side here, it says the following exercises incorporate best practices to assist project frontline staff in management and fostering an inclusive shelter community. All right, so Kelly says, she shouldn't even be allowed to stay in my room. She's not even a girl. Dan says, what do you mean? Then Jennifer says, Kelly, could you speak with me in the office, in the staff office? So Jennifer is a staff person. So once they're in the office, Kelly says, you have no right to pull me in here. Jennifer, the staff person, says, I heard you say that one of your roommates isn't a woman and should not be allowed to stay in the woman's rooms. Can I ask to whom you are referring? Then Kelly says, who is the resident? Please, you know which one. Jennifer says the staff is very careful to ensure that all clients assigned a bed are eligible to be here, have nowhere else to go, and follow the rules. There is no one in the women's section who doesn't belong there. Kelly states, that's not fair. She is a guy and makes me really uncomfortable. She shouldn't be allowed to stay in my room. I'm just happy that Kelly is using the right pronouns, honestly. Then Jennifer says, staff may use any room at this shelter to serve people who need our help. No room or bed belongs to an individual client. If you have specific concerns regarding a resident, I'm happy to work with you to resolve them. However, if you are still uncomfortable here, we may not be able to meet your needs. Kelly states, I'm worried she's watching me undress when I get ready for bed. It reminds me of another situation in my past. I have a really hard time falling asleep when I'm reminded of it. Jennifer says, I know it's tough to share things like that. Thank you for trusting me. Let's talk about how you and I can help you feel safer without focusing on any other client. Maybe you could use the private single bathroom when you change for bed. Please remember, it is a violation of the rules to harass anyone or use derogatory terms. It can really make people who need our help feel unwelcome, intimidated, and excluded. If you were on the receiving end of that treatment, you can imagine how unsafe you might feel. If it happens again, we'll have to talk about whether this project is the right fit for you. So that is one example of how a conversation might go. This next page is following up with questions to consider. These steps supported non-discrimination, respecting individuals and confidentiality, and they tell you how that happened. There's some discussion points about harassment and ideas for intervening here. And so there are several different scenarios here that have different concerns, different settings. And so I think this is really helpful for folks kind of walking through with direct and frontline staff how some of this looks in practice. And I think it's great to role play, with staff to practice some of these and to really come up with how this looks in practice. So I will share this in the chat, but feel free to ask any questions if you have general questions or about this document now.
So the only question we got so far is this the correct time to ask a question that might be considered uninformed?
Yes, perfect time. And I am...
So the follow-up question is, what do people mean when they use the term queer?
Good question. So queer, if that is how someone is self-identifying, that could be to talk about their sexual orientation. That could be used to talk about their gender identity. It can be used for different social identity categories. It is more of an in-group term, though, so people who are not in the LGBTQ community don't often use the word as much on their own because it used to be a derogatory term. So it used to be used to harm folks and it meant negative things, and it has been reclaimed to mean more positive things now. But it's considered an umbrella term, which means it means different things to different folks. So it usually just means that someone is not heterosexual, or if they're using to talk about their gender identity, maybe they're not cisgender. So we went over I know this might be new information for folks. If you're able to watch that, I don't know if it was I think it was recorded. If you're able to watch that previous recording, that might give you a little bit more insight around language and things. But if not, hopefully that was somewhat helpful. But yeah, queer means different things to different people.
I put the link in one more time for the video that y'all can watch for the training that Angelica did for us last month on Soji 101. We do have a couple more questions. One is, if we refer people to your center, will they receive additional referrals for housing needs through the center if the center is not able to help?
Yes. So if they are referred to the center and they ask, whoever they're working with there for housing resources, we definitely do that. Yep, we have a whole department that focuses on that.
Okay, we're getting some more questions, so keep them coming. We have 10 minutes, folks. So we have kind of a personal question at 41. I have had a hard time using them. I don't have the same problem with trans people that identify as a different their birth assignment. Not that I'm against it in any way. I'm fully supportive, but I've noticed that when I'm referring to a non-binary person, I know I have to be super deliberate to make sure to say they. I guess my socialization just defaults to she and he. Are there any strategies or resources out there to help people relearn their pronoun use, or is it just practice?
Great question, and thank you for saying what many of us experience. That is a very natural and normal response to language changes, I think, especially something like pronoun use, because in terms of grammar, we've been taught that, you know, those pronouns, they, them, theirs, are for multiple people. So that is fair. That's your experience. I will, let's see here. There are some different resources. Yes, I'm going to put one in the chat that has more information, as well as, I think there are some videos attached here as well. Let's see. Yeah, videos that you can follow up with.
Someone is just letting us know that they think the person who has asked that question had a brave admittance. That I also struggle with this. We have to be retrained.
Yes, definitely. And I think that it's important to note that most people who know that you're trying are not going to say, oh my gosh, you misgendered me. I hate you. I'm never coming here again. If you let people know, like, you know, I'm trying, this is new for me. Thank you for your patience. That really goes a long way. I think as long as people know that you don't have any malicious intent and you're not purposefully misgendering them, they're usually pretty understanding. Folks are pretty understanding, knowing that some of this is new for most of us. And don't feel bad. I'm in this community. I grew up around LGBT folks most of my life, and still struggle with they, them, theirs pronouns. So you are not alone. And there's a link in the chat for mypronouns.org. They have a lot of different resources. So they've got, if you go to resources, once you click on them, I think there are some videos there as well that can, you know, shed some light on practicing pronouns, hearing people talk about their pronouns. There's a lot of different resources there. So hopefully that is helpful as well.
We were asked in the chat again if the question about the 2 bedrooms was addressed. So I think you did during the activity, but if maybe you could clarify a little more.
Yeah, so in the expectations that I added to the chat, that training scenario is kind of an example of how someone might walk through, because that was a scenario where someone was uncomfortable sharing their room. There were rooms with 4 people, not 2, but that person was uncomfortable sharing a room with someone who was transgender. And the staff was able to kind of, you know, walk the person through what that might look like if they were to request a different room or something. So that, let me know if you did not receive that in the chat, the equal access expectations training scenarios. But as far as I know, according to this rule, yes, people are able to stay in rooms that are in accordance with their gender identity, not their assigned sex at birth. And if someone is uncomfortable with that, they would probably be the one to move, not the person who identifies as transgender.
Thank you. So we have 6 minutes left, folks. So if you have any more questions, this would be the time. I'm going to real quick while I wait to see if any more questions come in. Remind everybody that we have a free monthly webinar from Micah. So once a month, usually the 3rd Monday, usually from 1 to 2:30, we provide a training for homeless service providers. Next month, we'll be going over the eviction report that Poverty Solutions came out with. That will actually be on the 13th. So the 2nd Monday. We offer these trainings for free, and we are not really funded to host them. So if you find this really beneficial, you might want to consider becoming a Micah member personally. And Eleanor will put that link in the chat for us. Or if your organization wants to become a member, we would gladly welcome you as well. And that funding helps us do a lot of the work that we do, including offering free webinars for everybody. Additionally, there will be a survey at the end of this webinar that will pop up on the screen, as well as come to you in your thank you for attending email. So I would also really appreciate it if you could fill that out. It helps me create better webinars for you and bring you the topics that would be most helpful. So thanks for that.
And I just want to share one more thing. I just put this link in the chat. for the page that talks more about the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Access Rule, all of that. So there's more information here, as well as state and local laws that could back people up if they're experiencing discrimination. Like I said, Michigan is a little tricky. We're not listed here because we're not on the same page just yet. But this is what I think is actually really cool, something that you all can take back to your agencies and use. There are a couple of posters here. So the equal access poster looks like this. And this is something that, you are welcome to hang up, to share with folks who are coming in for services, kind of walking them through what the expectations are for volunteers, staff, people staying there. So that's one flyer. And there's another flyer about gender stereotypes. So those are both resources that could be put into practice right away, just putting those up on your walls. It's taken a while to load. But yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you all for your time. This flyer is not coming up. This one's a little bit more intense, but there are some options.